This is my favorite knife. It's looking pretty rough, but it's also not cutting very well either. Today I'm going to show you my routine for sharpening knives. This is the same routine that I used working at Michelin-star restaurants. This is going to help you get the best performance out of your knives, but also it's easy to do in your own home. Full list of tools I use is linked in the description. I think the first and biggest consideration is how you're going to sharpen your knives. I'm a big proponent of using stones because it allows you to get the exact angle that you want, and it's also a great skill to have because it allows you to sharpen every style of knife. There's three main different styles of stone. First is synthetic. This is a great stone for someone that's just getting into knife sharpening. This is the type that I got when I first started. These stones cut, which just means remove steel, pretty well, and they're inexpensive. The downside is that you have to soak them for 20 minutes before you use them every time, and they typically wear unevenly, so you have to maintain the stones. The stones that I use now are ceramic stones. I like these because you don't have to soak them at all. They're also known as no splash. They cut better than synthetic stones, and these stones take less maintenance. Downside is they are a lot more expensive. Third option is natural stones. These are more expensive, hardest to maintain, take the most skills to use, but they create a nice polish on your knife. So when you're sharpening, first thing that you really want to consider on the knives is what is the profile of the blade. First, you have double bevel. This is also known as a 50-50 grind. This is going to be the most common blade type that you'll see out here. This is nice because you sharpen it evenly on both sides. Next is asymmetrical. This is going to be a lot less common. I feel like this is more typical for a Japanese knife. It's sharpened on both sides, but the angles are different. So this one's a 70-30. Which is the most common asymmetrical blade you'll see. Last is single bevel. This is sharpened only on one side and it's flat or concaved on the other. The reason why you want to think about this before is because it's gonna change the angle and the approach that you use for sharpening. The last thing you want to consider is the hardness of the steel. This is known as the Rockwell scale, and this is going to change how steep of an angle your knife can take and hold, as well as how much polish or smoothness, refinement of the blade you can actually put on the knife. So these are two different knives right here. This is a stainless steel knife. This is Japanese, which the origin does play a huge part of this. A German or a Western knife is not gonna typically have the same Rockwell as a Japanese knife. Usually Western knives are between 56 and 60 Rockwell, where a Japanese knife is usually between 59 and 65 Rockwell. So this is a stainless steel knife. This is probably about 59-60, where this is a carbon steel knife sandwiched between stainless steel, and this is about 62 Rockwell. So this knife can take a steeper angle and also more polish. So for grit size, we have all different levels of coarseness. So first is very coarse. This is less than 400 grit. This is for reshaping a knife or reprofiling it. Next is coarse. This is between 500 and 1,000, and this is great for getting out chips of your knife. Next, we have medium. This is between 1,000 and 3,000. This is usually the base that I suggest anyone start at. Next, we go up to fine. This is between 4,000 and 6,000 grit. And then we have very fine. This is usually 7,000 and above. Now, these two stones, 1,000 and 6,000, is typically where I recommend people do most of their sharpening in. You shouldn't really need these two stones, and you only really need a very fine stone if you have carbon steel and you're looking for a very fine polish. The last thing we want to consider before starting the sharpening process is what angle we're going to put on the knife. Typically with Western knives, you want to go between 25 and 20 degrees, where Japanese knives is usually between 20 and 15 degrees. Now this is really important because the longevity of the blade that you put on is going to be determined by the hardness of the steel and the angle that you put on the knife. A harder steel can take a steeper angle, where a softer steel won't be able to take a steeper angle, but it's less prone to chipping. One trick that I have is to use a Sharpie. Now, what you can do is mark the edge of the blade, and as you sharpen, the Sharpie will start to rub off, and don't worry, it's not going to stain or ruin your stone, but it's going to show you at what angle you have. It's going to make it a lot easier to get both sides or both bevels of your knife at the same angle. Now with carbon steels that have a lot of patina like this one, which just means that the steel has discolored, this is natural with carbon steel, it's very easy to see the angle of the knife just by rubbing away the patina and getting a polish on the knife. So one way to understand if you are putting enough pressure or too much pressure is using a scale. So I like to put it into grams, and we have the push and the pull motion. Now, when I'm doing push, I like to put a little bit more pressure, and when I'm pulling back, I like to be about half the pressure. Now, with the push motion, on a scale, I like to see the amount of pressure between 1,000 and 1,200 grams. So this should give you an idea of how much pressure I put on my knife. And when I do the pull, I'm looking between 400 and 500 grams of pressure. So it's just enough to make sure the knife is coming in full contact. So to actually start the sharpening process, first there's one tool that I highly recommend. It's a sink bridge. This is amazing because it holds your stones in place, and you can use this over the countertops. It does have rubber on the bottom to grip, but you can do this over the sink so all the metal goes into the sink. And when you have counters like mine that are super porous, the metal shavings actually stain it. So this will keep your counters looking better, and it also makes less of a mess. So first thing we want is our 1000 grit stone. Now this is ceramic, so it's splash and go, but if you're using a synthetic stone, you're going to want to soak that for 20 minutes. A little bit of water. For the stroke, there's different kinds of strokes that you can have. Some people do this really aggressive stroke like this. It really digs in and it cuts really fast. But I find that unless your knife is very dull and you only are using like 1000 grit, that's too aggressive of a stroke. The way that I prefer is nice long strokes. We want to place the knife on there, and I know just from sharpening, I find the angles, but if you're using a knife that has the factory angle on it, which means that it has never been sharpened before, those are great to learn on because you already have an angle on there to find. You can usually find it by wiggling the knife, and you'll find that there's one point where you feel contact with the stone, and that's the angle that you want to hold. We go strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I can check. I can see the angle. I can see right here on the tip that I'm actually not hitting that very much. Another thing to consider is the count that you do. The number that you hit is not important, but what is important is that we're doing the same or similar count on both sides. And one thing I always do while sharpening is make sure that I get the tip of the knife and the heel of the knife very well. These areas of the knife tend to get neglected, and tip is amazing for using for fine detail work, while the heel of the knife is typically the strongest part of the knife. So you're probably wondering, how do you know at what point do you move on? One indicator that I look for is called a burr. Now this is a thin piece of metal that folds over when you've reached the edge of the knife and is an indicator that the knife is sharp. You should feel a thin piece of metal on one side, so whatever side you sharpened on last, it'll be on the opposite because it rolls over. You can find that. Another indicator, one that I use probably the most, because you can see along the blade how sharp it is in each spot, is to actually use your thumbnail. Now I know that sounds maybe a little bit crazy, but this is great because the knife will actually grip. And you don't have to go deep into your thumbnail. It's just the metal holding onto the knife. But I can see right here that this part isn't as sharp as this part down here. And then the tip is good. So I need to work this section right here a little bit more. Now, once you're done sharpening, you're going to want to take your stone. The way that I do with the ceramic stones is just rinse it down. And I use this thing called a rust eraser. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I just go over the stone and get out any metal that's in there. This is great because it doesn't actually flatten the stone, which ceramic stones don't need, but it removes any extra metal. There's also another stone, I believe it's called a Nagarua stone. I don't know how to pronounce it. This is a Japanese stone that is used for flattening. So this is great for ceramic stones, and make sure that you preserve the stone by going over and getting the stone as flat as possible. But ceramic stones whetstones don't require that. So the next we're gonna move up. I go to 6,000. A lot of people will say that going from 1,000 to 6,000 is a pretty large jump. I've always gone that jump. Maybe if I put in a 3,000 or 4,000, it'd have a little extra step. The blade would be a little bit more refined, a little bit more polished, but that is gonna require another stone, more time. I think that the cons outweigh the pros for that. So I just go straight to 6,000. Now with a fine stone like 6,000, this is gonna require less strokes than a 1,000 grit. 1,000 is sharpening the blade. This is actually removing any micro grooves that's caused by 1,000 and giving your blade a smooth polish. You can see that it's starting to take on a mirror polish, and this is what we're looking for. So I sharpened both sides. One indicator that this knife is finished is that you're gonna see a nice mirror polish along both sides of the knife. Another indicator is actually when you go into your thumb, it's gonna feel grippier. Now this is an indicator that this is ready to either be done or to move on to the final stone. Just like the last one, going to remove all the metal, and then I'm gonna let this fully dry before I put it away. And then I'm gonna go to 8,000. This is only useful for carbon steel. That's because most stainless steel knives are not going to be able to hold on to this polish. You're gonna do all this work to polish it, and the blade is gonna dull faster. There are some stainless steels like this knife right here. This is actually called R2 steel. This is a very hard stainless steel knife. This can take on the polish, but I don't think I have any other stainless steel knives that can. So I'm going to do the same that I did with the 6,000, go over it. It's not going to take as many strokes, and it's almost going to flow over it like it's just glass. It's just going to glide. You're not going to feel any grit at all. Now I'm very happy with where this blade is. The next step is to remove the burr. There's this little piece of metal, and when you cut with it, it can actually come off in your food. So you want to make sure that you remove it. My preferred method is to use the sink bridge made of wood and to rub the blade across it. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little gray line. I'll do this a couple times, make sure that I remove all the burr from it. And then I will go on to polishing the knife. This knife has patina and some little bit of rust coming on. It's because I live in San Diego, sea air. It's also pretty humid here sometimes. You might not necessarily have to do this step, but if you are sharpening, especially in the beginning, you might get something called stone burns. And that's where you went a little bit too steep when sharpening and you have little like scuffs on the blade. So we want to remove that. So rust eraser. I have a couple of these. I use one kind of as a pillow and the other one goes right on top. And you just go right along the blade and it will remove all the rust, all the patina, and get your knife back to how you want it to look. One thing I forgot to mention is I'll actually put a little bit of dish soap when I'm using the rust eraser. So adding a little bit of soap acts as a lubricant. It also has a dual purpose of cleaning your knife. We just sharpen this, there's little pieces of metal. Last thing you want to do is cut with a blade that has loose metal and get that into the food. As you can see, not every single blemish came off, and I'm okay with that. Blade doesn't have to be perfect, but there's no rust on it, which is the biggest thing. The layer is even, so there's not spots of patina or scuffs anywhere. There is little dots. If you have a carbon steel knife and it's older than a year old, it's gonna have a little dot on it. Next step is to let this dry. So I use a paper towel, wipe down the blade, wipe down the handle. Also really important, especially with hoe handles or traditional Japanese handles like this, where the metal goes directly inside the wood, because that's where a rot can happen. So we want to make sure this gets nice and dry. So now that the knife is sharpened, we want to finish it. Right here, this is a strop. It has a compound on it. It's about 16,000 grit. This already has quite a bit on it. If you're new to strops, you could use leather, or this is balsa wood. So you're gonna apply a little bit of this compound on, and then as you use the strop, it spreads it out. This has plenty on, so I'm not gonna add any on. The alternative to this is using like a honing rod. Now there's all types of honing rods. You can have a steel honing rod, ceramic, like what this one is. You could have diamond honing rods, which is metal with little pieces of diamond that help realign align and some even sharpen. The biggest misconception about honing rods is people think that it sharpens the blade. It doesn't. Neither does a strop. It aligns the blade so that everything's nice and smooth. And the benefit of a strop is that it polishes the knife. Ceramic and diamond will actually remove a little bit of metal, but it's not really enough to really sharpen a knife, but it's an extra bonus with them. So I recommend using a ceramic rod like this on most Japanese knives because they're hard enough to actually work on ceramic, but it does get to a point where some really high-end Japanese knives that have a really high Rockwell, and you would want to use a strop on them because a honing rod could end up chipping it. So it's going to be a similar motion to sharpening, but we're not going to draw back like we do on the stone. It's only going to be pushed forward. So I like to start from the tip, nice and slow, and then you can count them. And so the strop will give it a nice polish on the edge. It will realign the metal so everything's nice and straight. It'll give it that mirror polish, which when you're cutting with a knife that has a mirror polish, it flows through food so much better. Your food feels different. It has like a nice texture instead of being kind of rough. It's very like smooth and it eats better when it has a smoother. And I know it's like a little tiny detail, but it's little tiny details like this that really help elevate your cooking. So you want to do both sides of the knife. You don't have to do too much of them. Now, with a compound like this, 16,000 grit, most knives that aren't carbon aren't going to be able to hold this. Even this knife, like it'll hold it, but only for a little bit. So this is something that when I worked in restaurants, especially the Modern and Addison, I would strop my knives weekly. I would probably sharpen them every like month. Every week I'd bring my knives home to strop them. Now, when does a honing rod come in? It's easier to get out if you need like a little quick motion on it. You just glide the knife over and it can help realign your knife, make it feel a little bit sharper, but it's way easier to get out than pulling a strop out from underneath. For me, this was the go-to at work. This strop was what I did over the weekends. You don't want to bring it out just to polish one knife, then honing rod works great. So once I've gone through the strop a couple times, I like to alternate. I feel like this gives a more balanced edge. I can make sure that it's not more polished on one side than the other. And then how to know if your knife's finished. Just like the fingernail test, you can fill it in there. You can also use paper to cut. So we're looking for, instead of a ripping sound just going right through, I now know that the knife is nice and sharp. Now the last thing, this is to preserve both the steel and the handle, depending on what style of knife you have. If you have carbon steel, highly recommend putting oil on it. Some stainless steels actually will start to stain a little bit, and this is beneficial. But certainly if you're using a wood handle, usually like Paco wood is pretty tight and doesn't have a problem. But like a hoe handle like this is an expensive handle. I want to maintain it. Now, there are a lot of oils that you could put on this, but one thing that I like to use is block cream. Now, this is the same oil that I use to make sure that my board's nice and hydrated. This is great because it's a beeswax, it's natural, it's food safe, and it will help protect the knife. So I just put a little bit on my hands, rub it all over the handle. This is especially good for when you wash the handles, it really dries out the wood. So just make sure that it stays nice and hydrated. And then around the blade, I like to get the spine well, go down the sides. And then I'll just let this sit for 10-15 minutes until it's nice and dry. And then once it's sat, you just take a paper towel, you just wipe it off. And you can see it actually will help remove some of that extra metal that's on the sides. I oil my knives every time I'm strop them. Obviously this knife hasn't been stropped for a while, if you saw what it looked like in the beginning. But a lot of that has to do with the humidity and the level of salt in the air in San Diego. And so the last thing, this isn't something that I do every time. This knife doesn't need this, but this is important for if you have a hoe handle like this, a traditional Japanese handle, it goes straight into the knife. You can see there's an area right here that the wood can be exposed to water and it can rot out your handle and your knife will just fall out. Every time I buy a new knife with a hoe handle, I put some epoxy in it. You just put this on a little to-go container or something you can throw away. Mix it up. It has two different glues in here and they need to be mixed together, and then you just put it inside where the tang meets the handle. And this is marine, so this is specific for locking out water. This is something that you probably do it once and help your handle last the life of your knife. Maybe you do it one extra time after 10 or 15 years, but I highly recommend, if you have hoe handles like this, to put on some epoxy. Now you know the proper techniques to take care of your knives. Watch this video next to learn how to use it properly too.